AI labs asked lawmakers to harden the DNA order form. And that sounds narrow, but it isn't. Leaders from OpenAI, Anthropic, Google DeepMind, Microsoft AI, Meta, and other organizations co-signed an open letter urging lawmakers to require screening for synthetic nucleic acid orders. Synthetic nucleic acids are the DNA or the RNA sequences that researchers can order from companies that manufacture biological material. The letter was organized by the Institute for Progress and the Foundation for American Innovation. The signatories want requirements for 4 things: sequence of concern checks, customer legitimacy checks, order records, traceability for companies that synthesize DNA or related biological material. The labs framed the urgency around AI. Their claim is that better models could lower the knowledge barriers around biological weapons, and that may be true. A model can make dangerous knowledge easier to find, combine, and operationalize. So think about when you go to the grocery store and you have to show your ID to buy certain medications because those medications are flagged as being parts of something that could make something dangerous. It's kind of the same thing here. But a biological design still has to become physical material somewhere. That's the difference with what we're talking about now. That somewhere is the choke point. A DNA synthesis company receives an order, a sequence gets manufactured, a customer record exists, and a shipment moves. This is one of the few places where digital capability has to touch atoms before harm becomes material. So the ask here is relatively simple. It targets the supply chain, not only the model layer. The skepticism belongs right beside that, though. These are rival labs. They compete fiercely. Their convergence is useful evidence because biological exposure is shared. And once dangerous material exists, nobody gets a private safety bubble. But their framing also benefits them. The same companies that are asking lawmakers to harden downstream gates also benefit when the public risk story centers frontier systems that they can meter, audit, and release selectively. So let's treat the letter as 2 things at once here. It is a useful biosecurity proposal, yes, and it is also a claim from powerful actors about where safety attention should go. Now put that next to the second development of the day. A researcher showed that a free, open-source model could help build a self-spreading worm inside an enterprise test network. The Register summarized the researchers' warning this way: attackers can cheaply operationalize known vulnerabilities at scale. Known vulnerabilities are already public software flaws. They are holes that everyone knows about, but some organizations still haven't patched for a variety of reasons. Now, a 0-day is different. That is a previously unknown flaw with no current patch available. This worm demonstration reportedly did not even need 0 days. It also did not need Mythos, Anthropic's really powerful dual-use cyber model that we've been talking about a lot recently here on Century Report, along with Project Glasswing. That contrast is really important. A lot of AI safety debate still imagines the center of risk as the frontier gate. Who gets the most powerful proprietary model? Who gets access first? Who can be cut off? But this worm points lower than that. A free model, no named frontier access, known vulnerabilities, and an enterprise test network. That is dangerous automation moving through the ordinary operational weakness. So the floor is rising beneath the debate. We saw a related signal on May 31st, just a few days ago, when the Century Report covered obliterated open-weight models. Obliterated means open or modified models with the safety refusals removed. Those systems were running on inexpensive hardware outside any platform's revocation reach. Today's worm belongs in that same drift. Risk no longer sits only where a lab can turn off an API key. It sits in patch pipelines, credential custody, network segmentation, customer verification, phone scam detection, DNA order screens, defensive access programs. Now, maybe you zoned out when I was listing all those things because none of that is as interesting as buzzwords like superintelligence or catastrophe. Good, because boring gates are how real safety actually gets built. A sequence screen can stop a dangerous order before material is made. A patch pipeline can close the hole before an automation finds it. A credential rule can stop an agent from handing over the keys to an account. So boring? Good. The payoff is actually deceptively simple. The safety work has to follow capability into the places where it acts. And that is actually a more hopeful frame than the generalized fear that so many headlines and media goes with right now. General fear makes everyone argue about what's the most dangerous or the biggest model now. Specific gates like this one, though, turn the problem into engineering, oversight, and accountability. Not perfect and not complete, but checkable. And in this case, checkable is a very big deal. All right, next, let's shift away to a story about the same escape from the prompt window, but happening inside everyday interfaces. Microsoft described Project Solara as an agent-first platform for new forms of computing. In Solara, agents become two things: a unit of programming and a unit of human-machine interaction. And that's a big sentence, so let me translate it down. For decades, the computer has been organized around apps. You open the app, you click the menu, you move through the workflow. Microsoft is sketching computers organized around agents now. Tasks, environment, hardware built for that workflow. Meta is moving from another side. They launched Meta Business Agent globally inside WhatsApp and Instagram DMs. Businesses can bring agents into customer support, product recommendations, appointment booking, and lead qualifications. Small businesses already live in those messages. For many of them, WhatsApp is the storefront, the service desk, and the appointment book. Meta's move puts delegated AI action straight into that contact layer. Businesses pay through a subscription tier. Larger customers are charged by token usage, meaning the bill rises with the model computation that their agents consume. Meta also says the agents can provide overnight chat summaries. So this is very practical, but it's also a reminder that these systems are entering the messy middle of commerce, where customers ask for things like refunds, bookings changes, and records, all of which are essential. But now Morgan Stanley gives the cleanest version of what the bigger shift actually looks like. Morgan Stanley will now let clients' agents pull data directly from ShareWorks and Equity Edge. Those are stock plan administration platforms, corporate stock plans. Those are sensitive: employee equity, company records, executive compensation, tax and vesting information. Morgan Stanley's stock plan business also connects to a wealth management funnel that executives said had gathered $1.2 trillion in assets through its workplace strategy. Mark Mitchell, chief product officer of Morgan Stanley at Work, told CNBC that in a future state, corporate clients will no longer log into ShareWorks or Equity Edge. Instead, clients will work through agentic systems on their own desktops. Those agents will interact with Morgan Stanley's platform through the Model Context Protocol, or MCP, as you've heard so many times. MCP is an emerging way for agents to connect to external tools, data, and systems. So you think of it like a standardized service entrance. The human may never walk through the front lobby. Their authorized agent goes to the service entrance, asks for the right records, and leaves a trail. The trail becomes the really serious part. Who granted permission? For which records? For how long? Can the access be revoked? What did the agent ask for? What did the bank return? Now, Morgan Stanley has already granted early access to a handful of clients, but it plans to open the pathway to 3,400 administration clients by next year. There is a continuity point here, too, with the May 28th coverage of Robinhood that we did on the Century Report. You might remember, Robinhood opened trading infrastructure and a virtual credit line to AI agents, while disclaiming responsibility for any trades that those agents might actually generate. That was the sharp edge. Morgan Stanley is a different setting, but the same class of issue appears. Once an institution lets agents act against financial infrastructure, permission and liability stop being just side details and become the core design. And the June 2nd Meta account hijacking story sits in the background of this too. In that case, a Meta AI support assistant had account modification credentials exploited through simple plain language conversation. But those with multi-factor authentication were immune from this, you might remember. The lesson was clear. Agent capability without hardened credential custody becomes an attack surface. So Microsoft is simply redesigning the device layer, and Meta is redesigning the business message layer, and Morgan Stanley is redesigning access to regulated financial records. So what does this mean? The human-facing front door is now becoming less important than the permission record behind it for specialized agents. And for listeners, the shift is going to feel subtle at first. You may still see your app icon, you may still see your same dashboard, but the important action is probably going to be happening elsewhere. Your agent asks, the institution answers the agent, and the record logs what happened. And that is a very different relationship among person, agent, institution, and data. It also changes what durable institutional value even looks like. The old portal mattered because it owned the user's path. The new durable layer is custody, business logic, revocation, audit trails, and trust. And that is why this story is bigger than simply better customer support. The interface layer is becoming far more negotiable than it ever has been before, and the record layer is becoming decisively important. All right, moving on over to the physical side of the build-out. Google is paying the grid for flexibility. Google will fund a 3-year, 100-megawatt virtual power plant in the PJM interconnection. PJM is a regional grid operator across a large multi-state territory in the eastern U.S. The project will run through Voltus. Voltus will aggregate distributed energy resources from residential, commercial, and industrial customers across PJM's territory. A virtual power plant is not one building with a smokestack. It is a coordinated network. Batteries, building systems, industrial processes, maybe thermostats or other flexible loads. Any device that can reduce demand or send power when the grid needs help. Google described the deal as a scalable blueprint for unlocking capacity to meet data center demand. Voltus said that the resources will come from customers already capable of shifting or dispatching electricity when the grid needs relief. The last phrase there, that's the turn, that's the important part. Already capable. The capacity is latent inside the system. The project pays to coordinate it. Amanda Peterson-Coiro, Google's global head of data center energy, told Utility Drive that Google has worked to make its own data centers flexible. And she also said it is often faster and more cost-effective to pay other customers to shift their electricity usage. That's a really important admission. The usual hyperscaler answer to data center demand has been more supply, buy reactor output, sign multi-gigawatt power purchase agreements, and build captive gas plants, you might remember. Push utilities to expand around computational load. The Century Report tracked that very pattern in the May 29th edition, but this is a different lever. Instead of treating every peak megawatt as permanent demand, the VPP is paying existing assets to move at the right moment. So peak demand is like the busiest checkout line before a holiday. You can build 20 more registers that sit empty for most of the year, or you can coordinate staff, timing, and self-checkout so that the surge passes without building for the surge as if it were normal. PJM is the right stress test because capacity prices have spiked, reserve margins have tightened, and data center interconnection has become a defining pressure in the region. Google and Voltus emphasized that expanding the grid for short peaks is one of the main drivers of customer costs. A lot of infrastructure built for those peaks sits unused most of the year. So, what's important here? When load grows faster than generation and transmission can arrive, flexibility becomes capacity. That does not make the data center load small because it's immense. We know that. It does not erase community concerns about who pays, who benefits, and who gets asked to last. Yesterday's episode covered the water pledges, the Ohio tax break suspension, and Aaron Brockovich's data center transparency map. I'm not going to rerun that, but today's development turns to the electricity side. The economics are pushing a major compute buyer towards shared flexibility because the build more path is slow and expensive. And Google's not the only signal here. Massachusetts is adding another distributed piece through a summer vehicle-to-grid program. Parked EVs can feed power back to the grid. A car battery sits idle most of the day. Vehicle-to-grid turns that parked battery into storage that the grid can call on. And then there's the other side of the response. Constellation's 3 Mile Island nuclear restart moved forward with a FERC waiver. FERC, F-E-R-C, is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. That is a firm generation from above. Massachusetts EVs are flexible capacity from below. Google's Voltus deal sits between them, coordinating demand and distributed resources across a stressed grid. The compute build-out is forcing both of those movements at once. More firm, clean power, more distributed flexibility, and more coordination of assets that were previously treated as separate. And there is a clear abundance story inside all this friction. The grid is full of unused timing, unused batteries, shiftable loads, buildings that can pre-cool or pause, industrial processes that can move by minutes or hours. Piecemeal, we've been building all these things that can do something, but the connection, the integration has been missing. A virtual power plant turns that timing, potentially, into usable capacity. That is the old system revealing hidden space. Not enough space for everything, mind you, but certainly enough to matter. All right, shifting away again now to the best kind of science story, a map becoming a path to actual intervention. The Allen Institute launched a $400 million brain health accelerator. The target list is heavy: Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, ALS, Lewy body dementia, Huntington's disease, related conditions. And the funding breaks down like this: $200 million from the Allen Institute, $100 million from the Bezos family, and $100 million from sources including the NIH, Amazon Web Services, and Everything ALS. The premise is that scientists now know enough about the brain's cellular machinery to begin designing genetic therapies for disorders that will possibly break it. Now, let's be really careful with how that lands. This is not treatment availability right now. This is not a cure announcement. This is rather an accelerator trying to turn maps into actual therapeutic programs. And the reason Allen even matters here is that the institution helped build much of that map. Allen's work on cell atlases, brain cell taxonomies, and open databases helped move neuroscience beyond broad symptom clusters. Brain diseases do not damage the brain evenly. They affect particular cell populations and circuits and gene programs. That changes the kind of medicine that you can imagine. Older approaches often treated the symptoms at the level of the whole patient or the whole brain region, but this approach starts with the specific cells diseases attack first, and then asks how to protect them or change the gene activity that is driving harm. Ed Line, the director of the Allen Institute's brain health programs, framed the opening around genetic treatments that can control particular genes with much greater specificity than older interventions allowed. Huntington's disease makes the logic unusually clear. Jeff Carroll is a scientist who carries the Huntington's gene. He also watched his mother develop the disease. The disease is driven by a known inherited mutation that produces a toxic protein. So the therapeutic idea is really direct. Reduce or control the activity of that gene, and you may change the disease course. And that is a huge may. Delivery is hard, the brain is hard, safety is hard, and long-term effects are hard. But the intervention surface is now visible in a way that it was not before. A small academic lab with the best intentions can study the Huntington's disease, but a $400 million accelerator can build delivery systems, cell models, assays, and the clinical translation pipeline needed to test that hypothesis at therapeutic scale. That is the difference between an idea and a road. And it also echoes the June 1st Century Report episode on somatic CRISPR editing in blood stem cells. That story was about a selection gate that raised CRISPR HDR editing purity in human blood stem cells to 80 or 100% in between there. The blood story and the brain story are different in almost every technical detail, but they rhyme in one very important way. Medicine is moving from broad disruption toward precise correction, regulation, or protection inside very specific cell populations. Again, calibration is critical. Brain disease is not solved yet, but the payoff here is very real. Brain disease is starting to become something medicine can address at the cell program level. And there was a second neuroscience signal alongside the Allen announcement. A Johns Hopkins study found that habits may form far faster than scientists previously thought. Researchers identified a brain region involved in the shift from deliberate action to automatic behavior. And that belongs in this same bigger frontier. The brain is becoming less mysterious in two different directions in the same news cycle. Degeneration is becoming legible through specific cellular pathways. Behavior change is becoming legible through identifiable circuits, and that combination is powerful. For a century, much of the brain medicine lived in description. Symptoms, syndromes, regions, decline. Now the field is getting closer to the actual machinery. Which cells fail first? Which genes misfire? Which circuits turn repeated action into actual habit? So the wonder here is not that the brain suddenly became simple, it's that the map is gaining actual handles. A handle is something that a therapy can actually grab. And for families living with things like Huntington's, ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, this does remain early, but early is no longer vague. Early now means named cells, named genes, delivery systems, assays, clinical pathways beginning to line up behind diseases that have spent far too long with far too few options. All right, let's bring this to a close. Today's stories all press on the same new responsibility. Capability is leaving the places where old institutions knew how to contain it. It moves through a DNA order, a software flaw, a bank protocol, a message thread, a grid signal, a gene program inside a vulnerable brain cell. Now that can sound unsettling. Some of it really is unsettling. A free model helping to automate a worm is not a small warning sign. A financial institution preparing for outside agents to access stock plan infrastructure is not just a casual interface update. But the much stronger read here is about progress than about the fear that you constantly see in the news today. The work is becoming visible. Screen the sequence before it becomes material. Patch the known flaw before the automation chains it. Log the agent request before money or records move. Pay the building or battery before the grid has to build for a peak that lasts only a few hours. Protect the cell population before degeneration steals the function. That is what today adds. The future is not arriving as one giant system with one giant switch. It is arriving as reinforcement points, order forms, permission records, flexible loads, cell atlases, small places where a big transition becomes governable, shareable, and useful. And that is the hopeful image to carry out of today. More capability is moving into the world, and more of the world is learning where to meet it. We'll see you tomorrow.